the next session, which is India First, Diplomacy in Time of Disruption. The poll question for this session is, India's national interests are best served by responding to America first with India First approach. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have the pleasure of welcoming on stage. May I request you all to please welcome him with a huge round of applause. We have with us Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. M.J. Akbar. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia, Senior Vice President, AIMA and Chairman, Ambuja Neotia Group. Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, Vice President, AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director, Kirloskar Brothers Limited. A very warm welcome to the dignitaries. May I request Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia to please deliver the welcome address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I request all of you to kindly settle down. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Honorable Minister with us. May I request you to please settle down, and may I also request you to avoid personal conversation at this moment. Mr. M.J. Akbar, Minister for State for External Affairs, Government of India. Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, Vice President, AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director, Kirloskar Brothers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you for a very special session on a very important matter of these times, looking after our national interest at the time of great disruption in the global order. Honorable Minister, it is a great privilege to have you with us, and many thanks indeed, sir, for accepting our invitation to address AIMA's National Management Convention. As the Minister of State for External Affairs, you hold the responsibility of growing India's global influence and stature. You have done a commendable job in some of the most challenging areas of the world, and under your leadership, Indian diplomacy is looking in good shape. Your ministry is taking good care of the national interests amid the ongoing geopolitical and geo-economic disruption. Thank you indeed for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you, sir. Sanjay, it is a pleasure to have you, a global business leader and a keen student of international relations. You have your finger on the pulse of the emerging world order. You are known for your sharp observations and candid views, and I'm sure that you will add spice to the discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is nearly after a century that the world is witnessing a popular rise in national belligerence. There is widespread sense of loss of national pride and sovereignty, and the people all over the world are electing leaders who promise to restore the lost glory. The biggest economies of the world are locked in a trade war, and the world's most powerful nations are showing muscle to have their way. Globalization is frowned upon, and even the worldwide digital services are under fire from digital nationalists. Diplomacy has become even more important in this very vitiated and challenging environment. India needs to open more overseas markets to sustain a high growth rate. India needs to supplement its domestic economy with substantial exports to achieve a double-digit GDP growth and to create enough income opportunities for Indian youth. India is adding nearly 1 million young people to its workforce each month, and at the usual level of economic growth, it will be difficult to offer all of them meaningful opportunities. The challenge is becoming harder as a tech-driven growth will rely on greater automation. India's economic diplomacy has to find ways to build bridges when everyone wants to build walls. In this age of aggressive victimhood, the lessons of the 20th century have been forgotten, and the spirit of peace and cooperation is being replaced with an urge to restore some lost greatness. It seems that the world must endure another round of prolonged stress as new military and economic powers emerge and make the incumbents feel threatened. Globalization has reduced the breathing space between the nations, and new technologies are shifting industry and jobs around. Paranoid nations are blaming everybody else for their domestic problems, and they are pushing back even at the risk of isolation or conflict. They are willing to ignore the basic reality that greater international cooperation and trade are essential to the national well-being. Diplomacy is being marginalized by the populist, super-machist leaders, and they refuse to play by the rules or even negotiate new rules. Their power depends on the projection of national prejudice and pride. However, it is at times like these that the diplomacy must wrest the initiative and save the world from slipping into another round of violent upheaval. Technology is complicating the matters as nationalism is trying to encroach on the connected world. As data and communication networks proliferate and get integrated across the world, the old notions of sovereignty and self-sufficiency are being shaken up. A digitized, connected world can function only when the data flows freely across the borders. However, technology has run into international politics. Solutions have to be found to make a connected world compatible with 200 separate nations with distinct preferences and practices. We are indeed privileged and honored to have Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. MJ Akbar, to tell us about how India's diplomacy is navigating the choppy waters and how the government is protecting and promoting our national interests in this disrupted world order. Though he needs no introduction, it is still my duty to give you a snapshot of his many accomplishments. Mr. Akbar, a prominent member of the Union government, he has been Minister of State for External Affairs since July 2016. He has played a key role in furthering India's interest in the Islamic world. In the past, he has been involved with think tanks focused on Islam's relationship with the rest of the world. A three-time Member of Parliament, he has been elected to both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. He started his political career in Congress in the late 1980s, but he returned to journalism soon thereafter. On his return to politics, he joined the BJP in 2014. An iconic journalist, he launched magazines and newspapers that developed large readerships. He was founding editor of India's first political news weekly, Sunday, and two dailies, The Telegraph and The Asian Age. He also edited the Deccan Chronicle. A prolific and distinguished writer, he has authored many internationally acclaimed books on history, nationalism, and faith. His blockbuster publications include India, The Siege Within, Nehru, The Making of India, The Shade of Swords, Jihad and the Conflict Between Islam and Christianity, and a novel named Blood Brothers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our guest of honor, Mr. MJ Akbar. Thank you.
My friend Harsh from the productive part of Calcutta, Mr. Kirloskar, assembled friends, a galaxy of our most thriving Indian community. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you this evening. What interests me about this subject, I'm not doing any value judgments here, but the interesting part of the subject for me is not so much the India first part of it. All of us have to take India first as a granted, as the essential element of a foreign policy in any case, irrespective of the environment, irrespective of any other consideration. Of course, we are all certainly India first, although in the sphere of foreign office, sphere of foreign affairs, we do understand that we do no longer live in a world of India or any other country only. Indeed, one of the principles of our foreign policy is that prosperity is sustainable only when it becomes shared prosperity. And by shared prosperity, we do mean both the horizontal, which is across the world, as well as the vertical, which means that prosperity, that the first and greatest fruits of economic growth have to go to those who need it most, which is to the poor. In fact, because I am in such an audience, I'm actually almost forced to begin with one of my pet peeves. That in my view at least, one of the greatest disservices to India's economic progress and India's economic growth has emerged from a phrase that was used so often, a phrase that emerged from the World Bank, that this phrase encapsulated in the trickle-down theory, that if we create enough growth at the top, some of it will trickle down to the poor. That's the basis of the trickle-down theory. I have not heard anything more nonsensical or disruptive or bilge of a highest order. The trickle-down theory basically means that those of us, which means all of us, who have swimming pools will get the waterfall, and those who are dying of thirst will get a trickle. That is not sustainable. It is simply not sustainable. The first and the largest rewards of economic growth have to go to those who need it most. But that said, let me address the subject at hand. The word that interests me is disruption. The meaning of disruption, the consequences of disruption, and then a very important question, is there anything new about disruption? Very often we feel that just because it is in our experience something has happened, it has rarely happened before or never happened before. And let me begin by offering you a thought which occurred to me as I was coming in thinking of how to address this question. Why don't you do a very simple experiment? Stand on the edge of a decade and make your wildest prediction about what will unfold in just the next 10 years. I'm not talking about long-term projections or medium-term projections, just what will happen in the next few years. And let's begin with 1910. How many people in 1910 predicted that in 4 years' time, Europe would suffer the greatest havoc it had ever seen in its history through World War I? And let's think in 1920, how many people sitting in America or across the world would ever actually have believed that in 1929 there would be the Great Depression, which would completely smash the economy of the greatest and the most, rising economies of the time? Sit even in 1930, and predict the Second World War in 1939. Sit on the edge of 1940, and I dare you to predict that the end of European colonization, which was a project designed to last for 400 years more, would crumble. And would crumble in India. And not only would it crumble in India, the fact that an Indian called Mahatma Gandhi, whose 150th anniversary we will be proudly celebrating from October 2nd, as an international phenomenon. This will be an international celebration all across the globe of what he achieved. And as I thought about it and did the analysis of what Gandhi's contribution, it was when he started. You know, so many of you from Calcutta, my sort of old city, my birthplace. And therefore, this anecdote that I'm telling you acquires a new resonance. That when Gandhiji began his, exactly 100 years ago, began his freedom movement and decided that the freedom movement would have to become a mass project, otherwise it wouldn't succeed. Nobody had understood the meaning of masses before, let alone the meaning of non-violence. At that moment, a person who has a road named after him in Calcutta, a very respected lawyer who was a member of the Viceroy's Council, said, and I can almost imagine the words, is that who does this old man think he is? The British old man in a dhoti think he is. The British Empire is going to last for 400 years. It was the greatest empire known in history. We all know. We heard that. But yet, when the Mahatma set out and mobilized the true power of the Indian people, it didn't last for more than 30 years. But even more interesting, the great question of the 19th century was, in fact, the question was, how do you defeat European imperialism? Nobody had the answer. And Gandhi found the answer in an Indian idea. And that idea was satyagraha. And satyagraha was not merely non-violence. It was the power of justice. And the power of something quite new in history, which was the power of people and their mobilization. That was the power of an Indian idea. Eventually, European colonization was laid low by an Indian idea. And look at the dramatic impact it had. When Gandhi started, it was 400 years. The moment India got freedom in 1947, European colonization all across the world could not last for more than 30 years more. Just 30 years more. Everywhere across the world. In fact, European colonization, in a sense, started in India and finished in India. But this will bring me to a point that I will address later. So, you stand on the age of 1940, and who would predict the atom bomb? And the disruption. We are thinking of disruption, aren't we? Who would, sit in 1950 and think of the hydrogen bomb and its attack, and the enormous nuclear arsenals that shaped the thinking and the worries and fears of that time. That was, psychological disruption gone to the point of creating almost, driving the world towards nuclear war, which when Cuba, 1962, also happened. Let's come back to India. Sit in 1960 and can you think of the 62 war? You might be actually, you could think of the 65 war, but 62 war. Think in 1970. Can you think of 1971? And so on and so forth. I could take these examples. All right, come on to the edge of the 21st century. In 2000, how many people, whether in New York or anywhere else in the world, would predict 9/11? Or indeed, the banking collapse of Lehman Brothers. Aren't we doing that 8 years or 10 years of that now? And you can transfer that. Some of the examples I can't give because it would get almost too personal, leading to reportage I don't want. But the point is that disruption has always been a very major challenge. In fact, the absence of disruption is what is new, not the presence of disruption. What was the most important development of the last 100 years? It is not simply the fall of imperialism or fall of colonialism. The most important development is the end of the age of empire. In 1918, 1919, with the collapse of 4 great empires, Tsarist, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and German, of course, this is preceded by the collapse of 4 other great empires, 4 or 5. Actually, if you go back, the Spanish Empire in Latin America, followed by the Chinese, followed by the Indian was before, followed, the Indian, and so on and so forth. Everywhere you see that one idea that had held the security and geopolitics of thousands of years, finally. Now, what is it being replaced by? That's the question. What it is being replaced by a new idea. This is the idea of a nation state. Now, you can say that, of course, nations in a sense existed. But the boundaries of nations were determined by the strength of armies. They were not determined by the will of the people. Till 1945, it was perfectly legal to conquer countries. Nobody realizes this. Nobody ever questioned the legality of the British Empire. You may have liked it, disliked it, exploited it, or didn't, but nobody challenged the legality of it. So it was perfectly legal. And if the people rose, they were called rebels. As in 1857. If I wanted my country back, it was considered treason. And legally, that is how the law was shaped. Now, it is therefore we entered something extremely important, and also therefore change is always a cause of disruption. We entered the age of republics, or the Republican age. I do not say that we necessarily entered the age of democracy, because to enter the age of democracy is another step forward in this transition. But we entered an age where, irrespective of what your polity was, you were no longer inherited, except, of course, in the unfortunate circumstances of some parts of Indian politics, dynasty became irrelevant. The genes and the genetic element, which is by way of succession of power, was over. And now the leaders emerged from larger constituencies. In a democracy, they might emerge from a 100% constituency. In other systems, they emerge out of, let's say, smaller constituencies. But in any case, the constituency was not the accident of genes. Even in China, for example, if you take, let's say what would be essentially as not democracy as we understand it, it was not, leaders did not transfer it to their children. So this was also the emergence of new forms of change, and therefore new forms of disruption. And therefore, I would like to just leave you with a few examples of how the fog of change sometimes prevents us from asking the right questions. Believe me, answers are extremely important to you as well as to us, but questions are vital. If you don't ask the question, where are you going to get the answer? And it is extremely vital that we question whatever we assume to be the great and good. Today, even from Harsh's intervention, I can see from the spirit of what he's saying, the term populism is considered somehow a little sort of, leaves you with a queasy feeling, because it's no longer politically correct to be populist. I was on some seminar in Europe where 3 foreign ministers, and I turned around and I asked, I said, look, this is without reference to other things. But how do you question the importance of populism. Populism is only the voice of the people. And what shall we do? Shall we have democracies now without the voice of the people, just because the voice of the people doesn't agree with us? You cannot have, that when you get an agreement from the voter, then it's all fine. But if the voter has a different viewpoint, suddenly the whole system becomes a little... No, we have to find different words, different terminologies. It doesn't mean that everything that happens is correct. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If in certain societies the elites have lost touch with the popular base, that is not the fault of the popular base. The fault is elsewhere. So, in our situation on South Asia, there was a variation in the emergence because and this leads me to a very important aspect of our challenges, and therefore the need to find. Let me be very specific and cut down to the situation between India and Pakistan. It is very often considered to be a battle over geography. For me, that is a completely irrelevant way of seeing it. It is not a battle over geography. It is a battle over ideology. It is whether a nation space, a nation state, shall be built on the basis of faith supremacy. That means one faith, whatever it might be. Shall it be built on the basis of one faith being supreme and therefore superior to others? Or shall we have a nation state in which every faith is equal? Not simply before the law. Not simply before the law. The law is necessary. But equal in society, in social behavior. What it gives me enormous pride, joy, is the fact that in my country, every morning begins with the azan, followed closely by the music of the temple of Hanuman temples, of the bells from the Hanuman temples, followed by the recitation of the Guru Granth Sahib, and followed on Sundays by the peal of church bells, all of which you can find 5 miles away if you walk in the direction where the people live, not in the direction where hotels live. And because we are Indians, our secularism is not silent secularism. It is very loud secularism. So, but this is the basis. The fact that we may err from our own ideals or others may, does not change the importance of the ideals. We are today, we believe as Indians in faith equality, not because our constitution tells us to believe it. Our constitution tells us to believe it because we have believed it for thousands of years. And that's the critical difference. These mosques that I'm talking about, Azan has been going on for 1400 years. It's not something that emerged in the 20th century. And will go on for the next 1400 years. Now, this really is the ideological battle. And therefore, what we have at one end of our many challenges is what I described the challenge of modernity. What kind of a nation state are you going to be? And for me, modernity is defined by 4 fundamental pillars. Number 1, it must be democracy. Without democracy and all its freedoms. And all its freedoms. Democracy is not necessarily the right to speak sense, which Mohan does every morning, afternoon, and evening, sometimes with greater velocity than other people can manage. But it is also the right to speak nonsense. So, which explains much of, at least some of the things you hear. 2, you cannot be a modern nation anymore without freedom of faith and equality of faith. There are nations which have progressed, which have done very well, and so on. But if you don't have democracy and you do political rights, rights of speech and freedom of faith, then you're still a little short of the demands of the emerging 21st century. Number 3, you cannot be a modern nation if you do not have gender equality. That is not possible. And gender equality does not come only from, writing a few laws. Gender equality comes from gender emancipation, and then gender emancipation comes from economic empowerment. And therefore, the Prime Minister's Mudra program, the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan program, the Prime Minister's 80 million strong gas cylinder program, the Swachh Bharat program, these are all tremendous advances in gender equality and gender empowerment. Because the Swachh Bharat movement has given women not only dignity, it has given them health solutions, health safety. Mudra, 130 million Indians have taken the Mudra loan. Mudra loan lives far below your banking capabilities or your banking attentions. It is a loan, as you know, of 50,000 rupees and, maybe 5 lakhs or 6 lakhs or something. Right? Out of the 130 million, 78% of the loans have gone to women. And that is, trust me, massive gender empowerment, and gender empowerment among the poor. Not simply gender empowerment among the elites. Do you know something about the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, the housing program of 2,75,000 rupees for a house for the poorest of the poor? If you are a poor man and you ask for it, you won't get it. You will only get it if 50% of the house is owned by the wife or by a woman. Now, look at what this is doing. It seems a simple thing. It challenges the balance of power within a home. That's the key. Now the home is no longer one person, and therefore that person cannot throw the other person out. This is true gender emancipation, and so on. I mean, I could go on, except that. And fourth, of course, is something that we have addressed, that you cannot have economic equality. But there has to be something called economic equity. Without economic equity, in which the poor feel that they are part of the story or the narrative of economic growth, without that, nature never will. Now, this is the nation state that and this is becoming the template now as we move and engage with the rest of the world. It is becoming an important element but we ourselves are becoming the experience that others would like to emulate. But let me get to the demands of the foreign policy. How do you create a foreign policy for the 21st century? To, again, repeat much of the obvious would be a waste of time. You know the obvious, how dramatically the world is changing, how dramatically actually borders are being challenged. And before I begin on this subject, let me just complete what I believe to be the central challenge of the 21st century. The central challenge of the 20th century, I have just said, was answered on 15th August 1947. How to get freedom from the outsider. But there is what I call the 16th August 1947 question, which I am afraid too many countries do not pay attention for. The 16th August question is, what shall we do with freedom? 70 years later, you can't go around blaming the British. That's a tired, rotten, tattered alibi. They've gone. What do we do with freedom? Freedom freedom from the British only is the beginning of freedoms. We need freedom from hunger. We need freedom of opportunity. We need freedom of entrepreneurship. We need freedom of not only voice, we need freedom of ability. We need freedom of imagination to take us forward. And of course, as all of you know, we also need freedom from red tape, but we'll leave that for another session. But that's a beginning. And these are the questions in our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is determined by a very important, I believe, understanding of where exactly do we take our nation forward. Obviously, our primary goal is to take our nation forward, but how do we take it forward? Again, the most important development of people-centric geopolitics, or politics based on nation-states created by the people. Remember, 1918, there were about only 60 political spaces. Today, there are nearly 200 nations in the UN. How do we? Central aim is samriddhi, which is prosperity. Prosperity for your people, and add to it shared prosperity as a concept of engagement. Therefore, our engagement with Africa is absolutely drilled around what would be prosperity building exercises. Even our grants and aid programs are built around projects which are people-centric, not projects which are, government-centric. And this is really true of wherever we go. But prosperity is impossible without peace. We have wished everyone in every religion, every culture, peace and prosperity. Why are the two linked? Because one really is impossible without the other. And what do we mean when we talk of peace? We mean this. First, peace only comes through strength. Peace does not come through weakness. So, we build our strengths. And we do it even when we find vacuums have been left behind or have been inherited in key areas of our security. But if it is required in the nation's interest, it will happen. But when we say that we have a defense force in India, we might be one of the few countries which actually means it. Meaning, we don't have an offense force. There is no instance of India being aggressive towards anyone. And it's no desire to be aggressive towards anyone. On the other hand, we understand the meaning of defense. The meaning of defense is that not 1 inch shall be taken, of land shall be taken, and if any Indian is killed or hurt by terrorism or by cross-border hostility, then there shall be accountability. We will not hesitate a minute to hold up the principle of accountability. From the news on one side of our border, I would like to take you to news on the other side of the border. Our largest border problem is not with Pakistan. Our largest border problem is with China. On the other hand, look at the way, at the mature way, in which India and China have engaged with each other in order to calm. The principle, again, operating principle, is something that you may also find useful. Don't allow differences to become disputes. Don't allow disputes to become conflict. And use diplomacy, samvad, samriddhi, samvad, suraksha. Use samvad to set, which can be done with reasonable people. And you have, I don't want to get into specifics, but you know from the recent experience that we have stood on these principles. Stood on our principles and earned the respect of everyone for doing so. I would extend this I think we might be running short of time. I think we'll extend this to what another of us believes. For at least 400 years, if I believe the Venerable Dr. Henry Kissinger, who is an expert on Europe certainly, and on the emergence of the idea of nations, the world has been controlled by the theory of balance of power. But the balance of power really is a game played by big powers. In this century, the wars of conquest have become impasse. But the wars of influence and the wars of interest continue. So the balance of power systems acquire different manifestations. Look at me, trying so hard not to be specific. It's very unusual for me. But balance of power, we believe not in the balance of power, but in the power of balance. And that is what keeps the ship of state afloat on an even keel. And the Prime Minister has done a remarkable job of maintaining this power of balance. And I don't want to labor you with too many illustrations. I just want to go with the simple fact of this year's engagements. The engagements of 2018. 2018 began with what was widely recognized, particularly from this bunch, because I have the representative also of Israel sitting here, and he knows because he was here in Delhi at the time. We had an enormously successful visit by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. After which, the Prime Minister flew off on a quick visit to Davos, and I reveal no great secrets when I say there was a lot of pressure, last-minute pressure, to request the Davos managers to find another lead speaker to give that speech, but they said no. The Prime Minister of India is the legitimate and will open this conference. And those of you who went to Davos, I imagine a lot of you will have heard these whispers. From Davos, he flies back after a day or day and a half. And then we welcome, uniquely, never happened before, all 10 heads of ASEAN to our Republic Day parade. Trust me, it isn't easy. It isn't easy. It's not just us making the request, they endorsing, and they did it very quickly. This is the kind of respect that has emerged, because actually the world believes that we don't have any aggressive intentions. We will protect our interests. Of course we will protect our interests. We will protect our interests vehemently and without compromise. But we have no interventionist game or policy in mind. So all 10. After which, what happens? The Prime Minister flies to the Middle East. Sorry for saying the Middle East. It's, as I was speaking at Manama, I said so many people were using the term Middle East, and I turned around and asked, excuse me, what precisely are you in the middle of? It's West Asia, it's not the Middle East. Middle East is a Western imperial term designed to mislead, not to elucidate. Went to West Asia, goes off, stops in Amman. His destination is Palestine. The King of Amman offers him his personal plane to do so. He is escorted by air forces which are technically hostile to each other. Look at the symbolism. Treat it as a metaphor. And when this is just after also the visit of Israel. And when he goes to Palestine, he's given the highest civilian order. From there he goes to UAE, where he opens another conference. This is on good governance across the world. And once again, he's asked to chair it and begin it because in recognition of his own good governance. And from there he goes to Oman. There again, he receives very exceptional treatment. Why is this happening? Then he comes back, and France's president, Macron, is here for the International Solar Alliance. In between, our External Affairs Minister goes to Saudi Arabia. And then, in the first week, if I'm not mistaken, of February or somewhere around there, we have a very important visit from Iran. After Iran, France. After France, Jordan. And so on and so forth. Now, what am I exactly? The point I'm making is that we have achieved a very unique and important ability to engage with and work with across binaries. And over again, nations are amazed. They said, you have good relations there and good relations here? I said, yes, we actually do. And certainly in the last 4 years, there's been a quantitative leap in positivity in these engagements. And we, understand and handle the relationships with sensitivity. We understand even in the economic engagement that nothing walks on a one-way street. And therefore, we have turned simultaneously in search, the Prime Minister has taken this initiative all over the world, to create India into a destination for investment. And India has become a primary destination for active investment. I'm not talking of money supplies to the Bombay Stock Exchange. I'm talking of investment. And you are, sure, partners in investment. We have taken a leap into areas. If I'm not mistaken, your company also, or at least many of the Pune companies, are taking now a very important leap towards creating self-sufficiency in defense production. Certainly, I was very proud when I was in Thailand to hear that in that famous rescue of those football team, the most useful thing they found was a Kirloskar pump. But this is not a small thing. This is evidence of national achievement. And I want to end on this region. One of the important expressions of India's new place in the world. In diplomacy, language is the first starting point of change. So the emergence of the Indo-Pacific as a region in the geostrategic map of the world, the term itself tells the story. It is now a term which is being recognized by America, recognized by Europe, recognized by many powers, right? It has entered the language of diplomacy, it has entered joint statements, right? And why do people do it? They do it because they believe that this is an actual and a correct definition of reality. This defines the new reality. Our Shastras said that India is not simply the land below the Himalayas, it is also the land above the seas. And these roots have carried our trade, our culture. It's always fascinating to go to Cambodia or go to Indonesia and to find their culture, their education, their language. When you go there, you not only celebrate at what was achieved, you also feel deeply saddened by so much that was lost during the centuries of colonization. Colonization broke those bridges. Colonization introduced wars. Do you think we had no engagement and no trade? But here's a fact. There is no history of any naval conflict in the Indian Ocean before the Portuguese arrived. Because we knew that we could live with each other on the basis of shared prosperity. It didn't make us all equal. It didn't make us all, the same. This leads me to another fundamental aspect of our multilateral engagement, of our UN engagement. And there is nothing in this modern age called a big nation or a small nation. All nations are equal, with equal rights and indeed equal obligations. Yes, different nations have different capacities, but size is not an element of determining those capacities. And the target in any case is to share capacities for a shared world. I hope this is not sounding like a sermon. It isn't. It is something that is very practical, and it is very real. And it is something that the world truly understands. It is the reason why a justice at the International Court of Hague, Justice Bhandari, wins an election against one of the members of the Security Council. Not easy to do. It makes India into an active, it puts it into active engagement with regions with which we seem to have lost connect, both to our west and to our east. India, I will just end by saying, has become now what I would call the pivotal nation of Asia. The course that India takes through the rest of the century will determine not only the course that Asia takes, but also the course this century takes. We have begun a journey. This journey has to be stabilized, because there will be turbulent weather ahead. Let's not bluff ourselves that things will be easy. There will be turbulence ahead. But India is actually on the way to finding the destiny that we dreamed of. Very critical to the destiny, of course, and I don't want to sound as if I'm ending on a partisan note, I really do mean this, is that we continue with a stable government. If you don't have a stable government, you won't have a stable foreign policy and an engagement policy. So, but it is something that is a very important part of the vision. That we don't believe that India will be there's useless terms that are used so often of who is a superpower, who is a semi-superpower. These all will fall into irrelevance, really. What is important is that India will be at the high table of world affairs in the 21st century, and India will be in the vanguard of the century. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will be releasing AIMA KPMG Management Capability Development Index India Report 2018. May I request Mr. Akhil Bansal, Deputy CEO, KPMG in India, Mr. Nitin Atrole, Office Managing Partner, KPMG in India, and Ms. Vaishali Dongre, Partner, People and Change, KPMG, to join the dignitaries on stage for the report release. May I request the dignitaries on the dais to please come center stage for the report release. May I request Ms. Dongre to kindly say a few words on the report? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great privilege, honor, to be partnered partnering with AIMA for the 5th report, which we've released today in 2018. Our journey started in 2011, and we have completed 5 reports till now. It's very difficult to synthesize this report in 1 minute, and I have a difficult task, but I'll try and do this. What we are doing is we are studying the Management Capability Development Index. There are 10 components which we've heard from today morning, which are being articulated, and the focus is on the 10 components. We have a great response of 511 companies from various sectors, majorly manufacturing, financial services, retail, TMT. What we've done in this analysis, we've also created one cluster, which makes this report far more meaningful and also does a lot of deep dive analysis. What we've done is we've created one cluster which has divided these 511 participants into 3 categories of different organizations. One, which we are calling it as budding. Second is the rising, and the third is the leading. It's very interesting when you read the report, you'll realize that what is applicable for the budding organization is completely different for the rising as well as the leading organization. So the parameters of disruption, which we talked about, the parameters of innovation and technology, and the focus areas for the entire management is extremely different. So this is a very, very deep dive report, and you should definitely read it, not just because of the management index, but also because of the contribution of 10 chairmen, CEOs, and promoters, including few who are sitting on the dais who've written exclusive articles on each of the 10 components. Last but not the least, I would definitely assure you is that this is one of the most intellectually stimulating and very forward-looking report. Do read it, not just because it is the AIMA and KPMG report, it is genuinely one of the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Dongre. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have the presentation of AIMA Keval Nohria Award for Academic Leadership in Management Education 2018. May I invite Mr. Keval Nohria to please join us on stage for the award presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, AIMA Keval Nohria Award for Academic Leadership in Management Education 2018 is being given to Dr. Bhimaraya Maitri. A distinguished academic administrator and a renowned teacher, he is an outstanding leader of management education in India. He has performed key roles at many management institutes in his remarkable career. Currently, he is the director at Indian Institute of Management, Tiruchirappalli, also known as IIM Trichy. He has built this new IIM as one of the most coveted business schools. Under his dynamic leadership, IIM Trichy is among the league of top business schools in India. He has contributed immensely as the Dean of L&T Institute of Project Management, Vadodara, MDI Gurgaon, IMI New Delhi, and as in charge PhD program at BITS Pilani. An exceptional teacher and thinker, he is a renowned expert in the areas of project management, quality management, and supply chain management. He has numerous books and research articles to his credit. He has been involved in executive education programs of public and private sector companies and has also trained more than 600 directors, deans, principals, and HODs of engineering institutes under TEQIP. A respected member of the management fraternity, he has involved and with several national and international higher education bodies. He has served as chairman and member of committees of AICTE, IGNOU, NBA, BIS, as well as the panels of UK India Education Research Initiative and Japan's ABMC accreditation. He is on the board and governing councils of several institutions. All India Management Association is pleased to confer the AIMA Keval Nohria Award for Academic Leadership in Management on Dr. Bhimaraya Maitri, Director, IIM Trichy. Congratulations, Dr. Maitri. If you would like to say a few words.
Dignitaries on the dais, dignitaries of the dais. First of all, at the outset, I thank AIMA and jury members for bestowing me a prestigious AIMA Keval Noharia Award for academic leadership in management education. I am deeply humbled. With great humility, I accept this award. In fact, I feel this award places greater weight on my shoulders to live up to the expectation of management fraternity in particular and higher education in general. Once again, I thank everybody for this prestigious award. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Congratulations once again, Dr. Maitri. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have the presentation of the AIMA Managing India Award for the Business Leader of the Year. And for this awards presentation, I have the pleasure of inviting on stage Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai. Under the category Business Leader of the Year award, we honor an individual who has revolutionized traditional Indian business practices while keeping the shareholders' interests uppermost in his or her mind with a relentless and clearly demonstrated strategic direction. Ladies and gentlemen, AIMA Managing India Award 2018 Business Leader of the Year is being presented to Mr. Ajay Piramal, Chairman Piramal Group. Mr. Ajay Piramal is an extraordinary business leader, a distinguished industrialist and amongst the leading philanthropists in India, and as Chairman of the Piramal Group, he has led its transformation into a $10 billion global business conglomerate. Piramal Group has diverse interests in pharmaceuticals, financial services, real estate, information services, and glass packages, with offices in 30 countries and its products being sold in more than 100 countries. Mr. Piramal is regarded as a torchbearer for responsible entrepreneurship with a strong focus on doing well and doing good, a philosophy that has created long-term value for the group's stakeholders and the community as a whole. A firm believer in the tenets of Bhagavad Gita, Mr. Piramal is a passionate advocate of trusteeship and responsible business ethos. He is deeply invested in unblocking India's socio-economic potential through the Piramal Foundation and is an ardent promoter of social entrepreneurship. Mr. Piramal actively steers the group's involvement in various social impact initiatives through the Piramal Foundation to develop innovative long-term and sociable solutions to resolve issues that are critical roadblocks towards unlocking India's economic potential. Mr. Piramal holds key positions on the boards of several companies and prestigious institutions and has been conferred with several national and international recognitions. All India Management Association is pleased to present the AIMA Managing India Award for Business Leader of the Year to Mr. Ajay Piramal, Chairman, Piramal Group. Congratulations, Mr. Piramal. We would request you to say a few words.
The Honorable Minister for State for External Affairs, Mr. Mohandas Pai, Mr. Harshvardhan, and Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, ladies and gentlemen. When I was given this award, or I was intimated about this award, I really felt very happy because to me, the All India Management Association has been really the premier association for management practices at a time when management was not that well regarded or well known in India. you've started this, and I know that all my career I have looked up to the AIMA, so this is a big honor for me. And I'm doubly honored because Mr. MJ Akbar has given this award. When I was growing up, your articles really influenced a lot of my thinking. I was really happy when you enter into politics because you've raised definitely the standard and the quality of politicians, so it is a great honor. We talk about leadership in disruption, and when I look at things around, and if you see Mr. Akbar, you talked about every decade. I was just trying to think, if you look at every decade, the groups which were at the top in the 80s, how many of them are today? Or even those which were on the top in the 2000s, how many are there today? There is huge disruption. And as you said, it is the norm that there is disruption. But I think leadership, again, and I'm only quoting again from your example, even in the age of disruption, certain things remain constant, and one of them is values. And this value which Mahatma Gandhi actually postulated to us of trusteeship, of how we look upon ourselves as trustees for the benefit of our beneficiaries. And who are the beneficiaries? They are our shareholders, our customers, our employees, and society. And if we work towards enhancing value for each of these constituents, I think we can build a sustainable, long-term business. And that's all I want to say. I want to thank you once again for this honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Piramal. May I now request Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar to deliver the concluding remarks?
Mr. MJ Akbar, Honorable Minister for External Affairs, Government of India, Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to conclude this excellent session. Honorable Minister, thank you for sharing your thoughts on disruption. I think first and foremost, you said a lot about disruption. Your speech helped us understand the churn in societies and the implication that it has on economies. I was also very happy that towards the end of your speech, you talked about the initiatives of the Government of India to make sure that India keeps and enhances its position in the world. You know, what I liked was when you started with the disruption, you looked at the first part of the, you didn't look at the first part, India first, you looked at disruption. And the fact that disruption has always been there. Basically, to use that cliche, change is the only constant. And what is really vital is that we question what is happening and think about what is going to happen next. You gave us a whole series of what happens, what one would have imagined at the beginning of a decade and what really did happen. You also explained about modernity, what modernity means. And the one that I liked best was gender equality, amongst all the things that you said. Because even earlier, I was explained how China went ahead of India. Mr. Mohandas Pai talked about how Mao educated the women of China, and that's what gave them a huge lead over the other developing nations a few decades later. You also spoke about India first, and what it means to India, and how peace comes through peace, because of, you get peace because you're strong. That's what I liked, that we have a defense force. And you started out by saying that prosperity is sustainable only when it is shared. And how prosperity for our people, we first get prosperity for our people, and then we share it with people around us. Differences should not be allowed to become disputes, how we are managing our relationship with China. So, our government's economic diplomacy, how it is seeing us through, I think that's very important, that we are friends with people who are enemies. I mean, we've managed to maintain good relations with people who don't work with one another. And I think going forward, that is what is going to help India move up the ladder. And finally, I'm very happy that our government is extremely pro-technology, which will ensure that we grow strong economically. I think that's what I would like to say. Thank you for sharing these thoughts. I think they're very relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Kirloskar.
I'm not done yet. I'd also like to congratulate the two winners, the award winners. Both of you are real inspirations for the rest of us. Honorable Minister, thank you once again for joining us over here. And we'd like to present a memento to you.
May I now request Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia to kindly present a memento to the Honorable Minister, Mr. Akbar, as a token of our appreciation and thanks. Thank you, sir, for joining us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we conclude this session. However, as you know, that we have a very special session of Aapki Adalat with Minister Mr. Nitin Gadkari and Mr. Rajat Sharma. However, we do require 15 minutes to prepare the stage. We would request you all to kindly leave the hall, but please do join us back in sharp